The auction room at the London Gallery hummed with the quiet, predatory energy of the city's wealthiest art collectors. My hand was a permanent fixture on the swell of my belly. 9 months in, this child was the only masterpiece in my life that wasn't a forgery. This was supposed to be Arthur's triumphant knight, another jewel in his investment crown. But I wasn't here to watch him bid. I was here to expose the ugly truth brushed beneath the canvas of our marriage. I navigated the maze of champagne flutes and bespoke suits, my fingers tight around the phone in my clutch. Arthur, my brilliant hedge fund manager husband, believed I was resting in our penthouse overlooking the Thames. For a moment, watching the city's elite whisper about brushstrokes and provenance, the whole scene felt surreal. Then I recognized his laugh, that confident, baritone boom that had once made me feel so secure. It came from the front of the room, where he stood beside the artist of the night's most anticipated piece. Her name was now a permanent scar on my heart. Serafina. My breath caught. I had hoped the flagged payments from our acquisitions account were a clerical error, but she was achingly real. Serafina Dubois, the art world's new darling, whose career Arthur had been so generously patronizing. She was all sharp angles and bohemian chic, standing next to an enormous canvas that now made a sickening kind of sense. Arthur, impeccable in a custom Savile Row suit, had a possessive hand resting on the small of her back. Next to the painting was the lot plaque. She was a vision of raw talent and ambition, a stark contrast to the heavy, weary vessel my body had become. A bitter coldness seeped into my bones. In my simple cashmere maternity dress, I felt like a ghost at the feast. Arthur's gaze scanned the room of potential bidders, a king surveying his court. His eyes passed right over me, then snapped back, the polished facade cracking to reveal pure shock. His handsome face hardened into a mask of cold fury, a flare of indignation, as if my presence was a flaw in his meticulously curated evening. Serafina's gaze followed his, her artist's curiosity shifting into a sharp, territorial glare. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. Before I lost my nerve, I walked directly toward them, stopping in front of the massive painting. "The piece is titled, 'My True North,'" I said, my voice steady and clear enough to cut through the nearby murmurings. How wonderfully sentimental. Arthur's practiced smile vanished, replaced by sheer rage. Serafina's composed expression flickered. I held up my phone. It's funny, the artist's private notes on her website are even more revealing. The dedication simply says, "For A.H., my only patron." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the sudden, focused silence of those around us. I could feel a dozen pairs of eyes, their polite interest in the art, shifting to a ravenous appetite for the drama unfolding. I looked from the vibrant canvas to Serafina, then locked eyes with my husband. "Is this the new asset class you've been diversifying into, Arthur?" The question hung in the air, a public declaration of war. His face was a thundercloud. My legs trembled, but I stood my ground. In that instant, the perfect gilded frame of our marriage shattered, the pieces falling like dust on the gallery's polished concrete floor. Across the room, a man who had been making notes in a catalog looked up, his pen forgotten as his eyes fixed on our crisis. He was about to become a variable in a disaster I hadn't yet begun to calculate. For a second, the room tilted, and the auction felt less like a sale and more like a sentencing. Arthur stood paralyzed, attempting to project an air of tired concern, as if my outburst was merely a symptom of late-stage pregnancy. But I could see the vein pulsing in his neck, the trapped panic behind his eyes. He cleared his throat. "Clara, you're creating a scene. We can discuss your confusion when we're home." The nerve of him to try and manage me in front of his peers was astonishing. Before I could answer, Seraphina stepped forward, her voice a silken, condescending purr. "Arthur, darling, who is this?" she asked, her eyes wide with feigned innocence, casting me as some unhinged stranger. "She seems terribly overwrought. Perhaps she needs a glass of water?" The pity in her tone was a direct attempt to dismiss me, to paint me as the hysterical wife. A surge of ice-cold rage straightened my spine. I wanted to unleash a torrent of truth, to detail the quiet, devastating conspiracy they had built. But Arthur spoke first, his voice a low, menacing hiss, intended only for me. "You are completely misreading this. I suggest you leave now, before you make a complete spectacle of yourself." The lie was so audacious, so complete. My hand trembled as I gripped my phone. The evidence was all there, the memories rushing back. Me, 8 months pregnant, discovering a series of massive wire transfers to a boutique gallery I'd never heard of. Me, home alone, while he was at late-night client dinners that were actually private viewings. Me, watching him pour our shared fortune into this woman's canvases while the foundation of our life together turned to rot. He had been systematically writing me out of our life story, one secret commission at a time. I lifted my chin. "I'm not misreading anything," I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room, loud enough for the growing circle of spectators. "Especially not when the password to your patrons only section is our wedding anniversary." Arthur's jaw clenched. He despised being contradicted, especially in public. Seraphina placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. "Arthur, please don't engage," she murmured, slipping into the role of the dignified artist being harassed. "This woman is clearly having a breakdown." The words were a calculated blow, designed to brand me as unstable. I turned, my eyes burning but dry. I would not give them the satisfaction of tears. As I took a step back, the room began to swim. My body chose that exact moment to betray me. My knees buckled. From the crowd, a man moved with intent. A calm voice cut through the whispers. "Whoa, steady on. You shouldn't have to stand for this." I turned my head. It was the man with the auction catalog, the art dealer. His expression wasn't pitying, just decent, as he offered a strong arm to catch me. His simple act of support would change the entire course of the evening in ways I couldn't imagine. The man led me to an empty bidder's chair, his presence a small, solid anchor in the shipwreck of my life. He was the complete opposite of Arthur. No flashy suit, just a smart tweed jacket, dark trousers, and keen, intelligent eyes that didn't shy away from the ugliness he had just witnessed. He procured a bottle of water from a nearby server's tray. "Just breathe," he said, his voice even. Their entire act was designed to make you feel like the crazy one. "You're not." I looked up at him, a knot forming in my throat. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The man gave a small, wry smile. "My name is Julian. I've bid against your husband before, and I couldn't help but overhear. I'm truly sorry you were put through that." I took a shaky sip of water, trying to compose myself. In my world, people didn't intervene. They watched and whispered later. But Julian was looking at me, not just seeing the spectacle. From across the room, Arthur made a sharp, contemptuous sound. "You have no business here." Julian stood to his full height, facing Arthur, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to my husband's barely contained rage. "I know what I saw," he said simply. "I saw a man publicly humiliate his pregnant wife to protect his investment. It doesn't take a connoisseur to see what's really happening." Seraphina let out a sharp, indignant gasp, her artistic poise finally shattering. "This is an entirely private matter," she hissed, her voice losing its cultured veneer. Julian's expression was unreadable. Perhaps, but an investor's character is a critical part of his reputation. Those words landed like a punch. Arthur's eyes darted around the room, finally grasping the scope of the reputational damage. Serafina, we're leaving, now. They made their exit, not with dignity, but like thieves fleeing a scene. As they vanished through a side door, a profound sense of relief washed over me. I finally exhaled, the breath I'd been holding for months. Thank you, I whispered to Julian. You really didn't have to do that. I'm aware, he said, his tone matter of fact, but I've never been one for standing by while powerful men try to silence someone telling the truth. His resolve struck a chord in me I thought had long since gone silent. Can I call you a car? Julian asked. Or help you get home? I nodded, still feeling weak. A car would be wonderful. As he pulled out his phone to book one, a new thought began to take shape in my mind. Respected rival dealers, who are known for their ethics, don't just happen to play the white knight at a competitor's crowning moment. I was suddenly certain that our meeting here, in this gallery, at this exact moment, was no happy accident. We were waiting by the cloakroom when the main doors of the gallery swung open again. The furious, expensive tap of Arthur's bespoke shoes echoed on the stone floor. I didn't need to see his face. My stomach plummeted. He was heading back toward us. Leo noticed the shift in my posture and repositioned himself, creating a subtle barrier as Julian cut across the gallery floor. It wasn't overtly defensive, more of a quiet declaration that a boundary now existed. Julian's face was a tight mask of fury, his gaze fixed on Leo as if he were the single point of failure in his perfectly orchestrated evening. Explain to me what you think you're doing, he hissed, his voice a low, threatening hum. Leo didn't even blink, merely arching a brow. Right now, I'm making sure your wife has a ride home from her own gallery. Did you have a different plan? It seems to me, Julian retorted, that you're a vulture capitalist trying to leverage a personal disagreement for a better deal. That's one interpretation, Leo said, his tone dangerously mild. Another is that you're a narcissist who just turned a personal disagreement into a catastrophic product launch. Chloe had vanished from the stage. It was only the three of us. This is getting ridiculous, she snapped, her voice sharp as she reappeared. We were just troubleshooting the demo's data integration, nothing more. The excuse was laughable. Her eyes drilled into me, cold and calculating, as if searching for the weakest point in my composure to exploit later. Julian smoothed the lapels of his $1,000 blazer. Clara, whatever statement you're trying to make by getting chummy with a potential investor during my launch, it's pathetic, even by your standards. That was the final straw. The composure I'd been clinging to simply disintegrated. Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm. In the last 5 minutes, this potential investor has shown more humanity toward our unborn child than you have in the last 9 months. His face hardened into a cold, indifferent sculpture. Chloe glided to his side, her voice dripping with condescending concern. Clara, honey, you really need to manage your stress response. This kind of emotional spike can't be good for the baby, especially with your history. Leo inhaled sharply, a sound that cut cleanly through the tension. That's quite enough. The entire atmosphere on the mezzanine shifted. He hadn't raised his voice, but the words landed with undeniable force, a shield against their casual cruelty. The two of you will stop speaking to her now, he stated, his tone absolute. She is clearly under duress. Don't you dare try to paint her as unstable. Julian opened his mouth to protest, then stopped. A new expression flickered across his face. Was it just surprise? Or was it the dawning, uncomfortable awareness that he was dealing with a power he hadn't accounted for in his calculations? I wasn't certain, but the look he gave Leo was the first crack in his Teflon confidence I'd seen all night. Chloe tugged his sleeve. Let it go, Julian. She's just making a fool of herself. As they began to move away, Julian shot one last analytical glare at Leo, trying to place the man who was obviously more than just another face in the crowd, a variable he couldn't immediately quantify. And right there, the first fissure appeared in the flawless, billion-dollar tech empire they were building. The second Julian and Chloe were out of earshot. Leo quietly offered me a bottle of water. It was one of those designer artesian waters from some remote volcanic spring, the kind that costs $25 a bottle and is ubiquitous in Silicon Valley boardrooms. My hands shook as I accepted it, but my eyes were glued to the glass elevator doors my husband had just disappeared behind. What did I ever do? I whispered, to be less important to him than a line of code. The question felt like shards of glass in my throat. I held my stomach, a purely protective instinct. You did absolutely nothing to cause this. My bottom lip began to tremble. I looked up at this man with a steady gaze, my expression screaming that there was no way he could know that. Leo leaned in a fraction, his voice both gentle and firm. "Listen to me," he said. "The actions of a man consumed by his own ego are never, ever a reflection of your worth." Before I could even begin to absorb his words, a fresh wave of gasps spread through the gallery. Everyone was staring at the massive projection screen on the far wall, first murmuring, then throwing shocked looks in our direction. My blood ran cold. Chloe was standing by the presentation console, her phone angled toward it, manipulating the system. The screen, meant to be cycling through sleek graphics of the new AI, was now displaying a feed, a stream of intimate, private texts between her and Julian, complete with photos from a board retreat in Napa that he had sworn I couldn't attend. "It's so sad, really," she remarked to a tech blogger beside her, her voice engineered for maximum broadcast. The pressure of becoming a father can really push a visionary to their limits. It's only natural he'd need to find support elsewhere. A dead silence fell over the room. Hundreds of eyes were now fixed on me, a vile cocktail of pity and morbid curiosity. My heart felt like it was trying to break through my ribs. "That's not true. None of that is true." The words were trapped in my throat, a silent scream. Chloe let out a perfectly timed, dramatic sigh. "Oh, Clara, my love, if you're having trouble regulating your emotions, you should know there are apps for that now." Leo stepped forward, his relaxed posture gone, replaced by an immovable presence as solid as the building's steel frame. "Shut it down." Chloe feigned a technical glitch. "I'm sorry." "You heard me," Leo repeated, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. "Kill the feed, right now." Julian stormed back toward us, his face crimson with rage. "Who the hell do you think you are? You don't get to come to my launch and give orders." Leo's expression was like polished stone. "You are actively orchestrating the public humiliation of your pregnant wife on a live stream. I suspect the ethics committee on your board at Aura Dynamics would find that actionable." He then met Julian's gaze, his voice becoming almost a whisper. "Or maybe I should just text my partners at the consortium. They have a rather strict character clause for founders we invest in." For the first time all night, pure, unadulterated panic flashed in Julian's eyes. "How do you know about my board?" he stammered. Leo paid him no mind. His eyes cut straight to Chloe, shattering her smug facade. "You have 5 seconds." Her smirk finally evaporated. Several people in the front row now had their phones up, recording the meltdown. The buzz of conversation grew louder. Finally, buckling under the pressure, Chloe lowered her phone and spat. "Fine," motioning for a technician to cut the projection, but Leo wasn't finished. Julian was desperately trying to signal the gallery's event manager, who was already hurrying over, her face a mask of controlled chaos. "Get this man out of here. Remove him from my event. Now." But he was a moment too late. Chloe stood frozen, a glass of champagne halfway to her lips. My own face felt numb from the shock. In an instant, the glittering party designed to celebrate Julian's genius had become the stage for his public implosion, and the fallout was instantaneous. The manager was speaking into her headset, her eyes darting between the blank screen, me, Julian, and the woman who was so obviously his mistress. She gestured to a security detail by the entrance, who immediately started moving toward them. Please escort them both from the premises. Julian froze mid-sentence. All the color drained from Chloe's face. And just like that, the public humiliation they had so carefully crafted for me was reflected back onto them, magnified tenfold. The head of security arrived, his posture calm and professional as he assessed the scene. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Sterling?" he asked, his tone making it clear he already knew there was. Leo laid out the facts with clinical precision. This woman was intentionally broadcasting private messages to publicly degrade Mr. Sterling's wife. There are several hundred witnesses, including members of the press. The security guard's face settled into an impassive, professional mask. "Sir, ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the gallery." Chloe's jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me? She's the one having a hysterical episode." Julian grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in. "Chloe, be quiet." But she was too enraged. She whirled to face the silent crowd. "This is insane. I was just showing the AI's deep dive capabilities." Leo's calm voice cut through her frantic defense. "There is a very clear line between a demonstration and defamation." Julian let out a ragged breath. "Let's just go." But as they started to leave, I felt a tiny, determined kick from deep inside me, a little flutter of life. My hand flew to my belly. "No, my baby boy, you are not to blame for any of this." And in that moment, something within me didn't just crack. It was reforged into something stronger, something that would never, ever make itself small for him again. For years, I had curated my life to fit into the perfect aesthetic of his ambition. I had tiptoed around the volatile moods of the man who was meant to be my partner. I had shouldered the weight of his emotional detachment as if it were a flaw in my own design. But feeling my son move as his father walked away with another woman, that was the catalyst that ignited a fire I thought he had long since smothered. I straightened my spine. "Actually," I said, my voice ringing clear and true in the heavy silence, loud enough for Julian to hear every word. "You owe our son an explanation." He stopped dead, his back still turned to me. Chloe spun around. "What did you just say to him?" Leo stood near me, a silent, unwavering pillar of support, seeming to understand that this was a stand I had to take for myself. I raised my chin. "This is your son, Julian. He can't understand what you did tonight, but I can. And the absolute least you owe him is the decency to acknowledge the family you are so publicly throwing away." A stunned, collective inhale swept through the gallery. Julian's smile was a frozen, brittle thing. "Chloe, not here. We are not doing this right now." I fired back, my voice shaking with rage. "Why not? Because there are no soundproof walls here for you to convince me I'm losing my mind? Because you have to answer for yourself in front of a live audience?" For an agonizingly long beat, the entire ballroom was utterly still. Then, in a final pathetic display of cowardice, Julian turned his back on me and our unborn baby and let Nina guide him through the stunned crowd. The moment they were gone, the spell broke. The chef, a man I'd briefly met earlier, put a steadying hand on my arm. That took an incredible amount of courage. But I didn't feel courageous. I felt like I was at ground zero of a controlled demolition, realizing this wasn't just a fight. It was the event that was leveling my entire world. The vacuum of silence they left behind was deafening. I cradled my stomach, the breath catching in my chest. I tried to anchor myself, to think only of the new life I was carrying. The chef gave me a moment of respectful silence before he spoke. Are you going to be all right? His voice was low, but it had a warm, substantial quality, like a man who was used to nourishing people. I could only manage a shaky nod, surrounded by the wreckage of my life. I have to be. He paused, then walked over to a bar that had been set up for the launch party and came back with a glass of sparkling water. Here, he said, offering it to me. You look like you need this. I took it, my cold fingers brushing against his warm ones. Thank you, I whispered. Ethan gave a small, reassuring smile. Of course. I was struck by the simple dignity in his expression. His eyes held no pity, just a deep, unwavering respect. A tiny spark of warmth managed to find its way through the ice that had formed around my heart. I should probably get out of here, I murmured, suddenly feeling the weight of 100 pairs of eyes, the air thick with whispered speculation. Ethan shook his head slightly. You have nothing to feel ashamed of. He does. But he stepped aside, giving me the space I needed, as I made my way to the coat check in the lobby. As the attendant handed me my silk shawl, she leaned in conspiratorially. That man who was helping you, she nodded toward Ethan. That's Ethan Reed, the chef. His restaurant just earned its 3rd star. I could only offer a weak smile, not daring to look back at him. Outside, the damp San Francisco fog was a sudden chilling shock. I pulled the shawl tighter, a reflexive gesture to shield my baby from the cold. My heart felt like it had been corrupted into a million lines of bad code. The entire operating system of my future now crashed beyond repair. Just then, Ethan stepped through the automatic glass doors behind me. Chloe. I turned, surprised he had followed, surprised he even knew my name. I don't think I ever told you my name. Look, he said, searching for the right words. I wasn't going to say anything, but what he did in there was unforgivable. And if you ever need help creating a new recipe for your life, I'd be honored to help. His offer was so unexpected, it stole the air from my lungs. People didn't do that, especially not for a complete stranger. Why? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a simple shrug, a gesture that seemed rooted in profound certainty. Because my entire life is about taking good, honest ingredients and making something real from them. I think everyone deserves that. A clear, unwavering sincerity shone in his eyes. Before I could think of a reply, my rideshare pulled up to the curb. I walked alone through the vast, echoing underground parking structure. The hum of the fluorescent lights felt oppressive in the silence. It felt like this kind man, a complete stranger, had just offered me a lifeline, and now I was descending back into the cold, empty reality of what had just happened. It was a strange, hollow feeling, being surrounded by concrete and steel after the glittering fantasy of the party upstairs. My older model sedan was parked under one of those buzzing lights, looking out of place among the gleaming Teslas and Lucids. I unlocked it and just stood there for a second, my hands trembling as I watched my breath fog in the chilly air. The car was a relic from before Julian's success, from a time when our dreams were small and shared, and the sight of it felt like another loss, another piece of a life that no longer existed. Every single nerve, ending in my body felt stripped raw. A sickening cocktail of public humiliation, white-hot anger, and a grief so immense I couldn't even begin to process. It was churning inside me. Ethan stopped a few feet away, giving me my space, but his quiet presence was a comfort in the storm of my emotions. You don't seem okay, he stated gently. I'm fine, I lied, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. No, you're not. His words weren't an accusation. They were just a simple acknowledgement of the truth. Hearing it said aloud finally shattered the last of my self-control. My vision swam with tears. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to choke back the sob that was tearing its way up from the deepest part of my soul. But it was no use. The sound escaped me, a raw, wounded cry that echoed in the concrete emptiness of the garage. I just don't get it. How can a man just delete his own child from a future projection, like some glitch in the code he wants to erase? Ethan let out a long, slow breath that seemed to carry a world of sadness with it. Some people would rather scrap an entire program than learn how to fix a single bug they created. A lump formed in my throat. But this baby isn't a bug. Of course not, he said, his voice instantly gentle. Anyone with a conscience would know this was a gift. I dug the heels of my hands into my eyes, wanting nothing more than one single quiet night. Just one evening to celebrate my husband's new venture without any drama. You still deserve that, a low voice said beside me. You're allowed to have moments of peace, even in the middle of a launch. The empathy in his tone was a strange, warm pressure building in my chest, a sensation so foreign it almost felt like hope. When I finally lowered my hands, his gaze held no pity, only a sharp and surprising level of understanding. You have a more resilient core than you think you do, Isabella. Tonight proved it. My breath hitched. I don't feel resilient. You don't have to, he answered. You just have to avoid being overwritten. But there was something in his tone that sounded less like a platitude and more like a promise. And I was suddenly struck by the unnerving certainty that our lives were now connected in a way that went far beyond a simple interview. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve and took a deep, shaky breath, trying to pull myself together. Ethan stood by my car, his hands in the pockets of his chef's trousers. If you don't mind, he began, his voice low and steady. I'll wait right here until you've driven away, just to make sure you get out okay. I could only manage a small, grateful nod. Thank you. You've been more than kind. But before I could get in the car, the near silent hum of an electric motor filled the garage. A sleek, black, lucid air rounded a concrete column and glided to a stop directly behind my car, trapping me. My stomach clenched. Julian. He got out so quickly, the driver's side door swung shut behind him. His face was a tight mask of controlled rage. The charming tech visionary from the stage had evaporated, replaced by someone cold and menacing. Chloe. His voice was a low growl. We are not finished. Ethan moved with an easy calm, positioning himself as a physical barrier between Julian and me. I believe it's time for you to go, Mr. Vance. Julian's eyes were locked on me, dismissing Ethan completely. You had no right to make a scene in front of my investors. Do you have any idea what your little outburst does to my image? I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. The image you value more than your own child? His jaw tightened. That is not what this is about, and you're smart enough to know it. I'm not the one who used $1 billion AI to announce my affair to the world. But Julian's fury had already found a new target. His glare shifted to Ethan, hot with a fresh, possessive anger. And who are you supposed to be? Julian sneered. The caterer? Playing the hero? Ethan's calm demeanor didn't waver. That's none of your business. Julian took a threatening step closer, his voice dripping with disdain. You think you can just serve a few canapes and insert yourself into my life? Ethan didn't even flinch, but the atmosphere around them became electric with tension. Your life? You're the one who fed it to an algorithm and broadcast the output on a 50-foot screen for the whole world to see. Don't try to rewrite the code now just because you got a result you didn't like. Julian's face went dark. If you say one more word, I swear I will. Ethan cut him off, his voice dangerously quiet. You'll what? Ruin my business? That seems to be your go-to solution for inconvenient truths. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Julian looked like he was about to explode, his hands clenching and unclenching by his sides. I saw it then, the raw panic behind the rage. "Stop," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "Julian, just leave." His furious gaze darted from me to Ethan and then back to me, where my hand was protectively covering my belly. For a split second, something other than anger flashed in his eyes. It was fear, not of Ethan, but of the perfectly engineered world he had built for himself, short-circuiting and crashing down around him. He backed off. "This isn't over," he spat. He climbed back into his custom Rivian and shot away, the tires making a faint, angry hum on the wet asphalt. Only when his taillights disappeared into the Seattle mist did Marcus seem to relax. He glanced back at me, his voice quiet once more. "Something tells me the real story is going to be a lot messier than the one he's selling." I swallowed against the knot in my throat, terrified he was right. This was just the first hairline crack in the perfect world Julian had engineered. That night, long after Leo was asleep, I sat on the sofa, listening to the gentle lapping of the water against the shore outside the glass walls of my waterfront home. The minimalist rooms felt vast and hollow, and the silence made the hurricane in my mind howl even louder. I couldn't stop scrolling through it all. The AI logs. Julian's cold, strategic plans for me. Marcus's steady presence cutting through the chaos. Every single memory was a fresh wave of nausea. My phone buzzed on the silk cushion beside me. The screen glowed with a secure line notification. My initial impulse was to ignore it, but a cold knot of dread in my gut told me I had to accept the call. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice frail and thin. There was a short pause, then a voice I knew better than my own, crisp and efficient. "Bella, it's Julian." My blood turned to ice. "What do you want?" He heaved an impatient sigh, the sound of a visionary burdened by lesser minds. "We need to sync up on our messaging. You were completely out of line tonight." That might be the understatement of the century. "The server was compromised," he snapped, before reining himself in. "Look, we need to manage the optics of this." I squeezed my eyelids shut. "You had 6 months to manage the optics." He plowed right over the comment. "I'm sending the PR team over tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. "No." The word felt like a stone, its weight surprising even myself. "You don't get to script my life anymore. This isn't a debate, Bella." "Oh yes," I countered, my voice perfectly level. "It is." A beat of charged silence passed. Then Julian's tone shifted, becoming smooth and patronizing in a way that always made my skin crawl. "Anya believes it would be more beneficial for the next funding round if we can handle this personal issue with discretion and unity." And there it was, the stark, transactional truth. "For the Series C funding," I repeated, a profound chill seeping into my bones. "Not for our baby." His inability to deny it was more damning than any confession. I ended the call before another word could contaminate the air. A nauseating twist of rage and grief tightened in my stomach. Julian didn't want a family. He wanted to mitigate a risk to his valuation, and Anya was his chief strategist on the matter. I buried my face in my hands, trying to choke back a sob. A soft chime from the smart home system at my front gate made me nearly jump out of my skin. When the chime sounded again, I saw Marcus on the security feed, holding a large thermos. "I had a feeling you might have skipped dinner," he said through the intercom, stating it more like a fact than a question. I just stared at the screen, bewildered. "How did you even know?" "You have the look of someone trying to hold the entire world together by yourself," he said, his voice gentle. I was following a lead for another story just down the road. It was a flimsy excuse, a kind fiction that felt like a warm, protective blanket. He came inside, placing the thermos on the quartz kitchen island. Are you okay? I just shook my head, abandoning any pretense of being fine. Marcus didn't offer a hug or any hollow reassurances. He simply waited, his presence a quiet, grounding anchor in the sterile room. And in that cold, modern house, with the gray Seattle light filtering through the massive windows and my universe imploding, I felt a sense of stability I hadn't known in years, grounded. But I was about to find out that being grounded just means you have a much longer way to fall. The next morning broke with a cold, relentless mist that clung to the windows. My sleep had been a disaster, plagued by fragmented nightmares of Julian's voice, a mask of dispassionate logic. His words from the AI log replayed in my head. It's to secure the platform's legacy, as if our unborn child was just a variable in an algorithm. I was pouring myself some water when a sharp, authoritative rap echoed from the front door. My heart sank. He can't be here, I whispered, my arms wrapping protectively around my stomach. The knock came again, louder this time. Bella, I know you're in there. We need to have a discussion. I drew a shaky breath and pulled the door open just a few inches, enough to see him standing there. What do you want, Julian? My voice was flat, stripped of any warmth. He forced the heavy door open and marched into the foyer. We are going to approach this like two logical people. I held my ground, a human wall blocking him from going any deeper into my home. You can't just force your way in here. It's about my son, he shot back, his tone edged with sharp impatience. Your son? I let out a dry, bitter chuckle. Is that his designation on today's talking points? Julian's eyes swept across the stark white interior, his jaw tight. Where is he? I didn't have to reply. Leo appeared around the corner from the media room, his young face a blend of curiosity and unease. Dad. Julian's entire demeanor shifted, a polished, media-trained smile snapping onto his face. Hey there, champ. Leo remained partially concealed by the doorway. Why are you here? Julian's smile frayed at the edges. I came to see you, of course. For the photo shoot? Leo asked with the devastating clarity that only a 7-year-old has. A cold dread washed over me. Julian's face hardened. What? Leo looked down at his light-up sneakers. I heard you practicing with Anya 2.0. The one that helps you sound like a good dad. You said you needed new pictures for the money men to prove you were a stable asset. Julian's head whipped around to face me, his eyes burning with a furious, profound humiliation. Did you feed him that? Before I could even think of a response, a calm voice came from the still open door. She didn't have to. You've been rehearsing loud enough for the whole block to hear. Julian spun around. Marcus stood there, calm and composed, his hands in the pockets of his rain jacket. My breath caught. Marcus. He walked in uninvited, stopping a few feet from my side. It wasn't a possessive move, but it was an undeniable statement of solidarity. Julian's face became blotchy with rage. What in the hell do you think you're doing here? Did she call her pet reporter to ghostwrite her side of the story? Not at all, Marcus said, his voice even. But when a tech mogul is shouting at his wife on his own doorstep, it tends to draw some attention. Julian's voice trembled with outrage. This is a private family matter. You are nothing to her. Marcus's composure was like stone, and yet I seemed to be the one she lets in the door. Something in Julian's polished veneer cracked. You need to get out of my house. You have no idea who you're messing with. I know exactly who I'm messing with, Marcus interrupted, his voice taking on a new, steely edge. Julian Croft, founder of Aura AI. I also know your revolutionary source code looks remarkably similar to a project that was abruptly abandoned at a university lab a few years back. A project led by a Dr. Anya Sharma right before she left the public sector. Julian just stood there, his mouth slightly agape. How could you possibly know? Marcus took one slow, deliberate step toward him, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. You should be very, very careful, whose work you try to rebrand as your own. Julian went pale, and in that moment, it became horrifyingly clear that Marcus Thorne was much more than the sympathetic journalist I'd been talking to. Julian stared at Marcus, the tech CEO's bravado crumbling into a fragile, sputtering rage. You think you can intimidate me by naming my own company? Marcus's expression was perfectly neutral. Number one, I find the truth is usually intimidating enough. A tiny fracture appeared in Julian's self-assurance, but it was wide enough for me to see the sheer panic beneath. I finally found my voice again, stepping forward to stand beside Marcus. You need to leave, Julian. Whatever this performance is for, I said, gesturing between the three of us. It's scaring Leo. Julian sneered. Oh, naturally. And I suppose this washed-up journalist is your new authority on parenting. Before I could answer, Leo's small voice cut through the tension. Mommy? His voice sounds like the bad robot in my cartoon. My heart broke. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, positioning himself more directly in Julian's path. He's finished making noise, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. Julian's eyes narrowed to slits. You have no authority here. Marcus gave a small, almost indifferent shrug. Then prove me wrong. Turn around, walk out that door, and be quiet. The air in our minimalist Pacific Heights penthouse felt thick with unspoken accusations. Julian looked from the sweeping view of the Golden Gate Bridge, a view he'd used to close countless deals, to our son, absorbed in building a complex Lego tower, a miniature version of his father's ambition. Then his gaze landed on me, the wife he thought was too preoccupied with her passion project startup to ever challenge him. When he spoke, it wasn't with regret, but with the cold fury of a CEO whose authority had been questioned. I don't owe either of you an explanation, he stated, his voice flat. I'm merely informing you that my lawyers are drafting a separation agreement that grants me primary custody. You can sign it, or we can do this the hard way. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't about our son. You have no legal basis for that, I countered, my voice shaking slightly. Oh, but your new PR strategist does, doesn't she? I shot back. Was it Isabel's brilliant idea to paint you as the devoted single father just in time for the new fund launch? He flinched, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. I pushed forward. This has nothing to do with parenting. This is about managing optics for your limited partners. Am I wrong? The chilling silence that hung between us confirmed everything. Marcus cleared his throat. Julian, a public custody fight will generate a level of media attention that your investors might find problematic. What kind of attention? Julian sneered. Marcus's demeanor shifted, the academic calm giving way to something hard as steel. The kind that encourages journalists to look into the data mining operation you secretly funded. The kind that gets regulators interested in the accidental server wipe at your last failed venture. The kind of attention the Tech Ethics Committee I co-chair specializes in generating. Julian's arrogance evaporated, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was the sudden, sickening realization that he was completely outmaneuvered. He was just now grasping the true weight of the quiet professor standing in his living room. He backed away toward the door. This isn't over, he stammered, before turning and practically running, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind him. Marcus looked at me, his expression full of regret that it had come to this. And in that ringing quiet, I understood that Julian wasn't the only influential man in the room. After Julian was gone, the penthouse felt vast and cold, the silence humming with tension. I leaned against the marble countertop, my hand on my pregnant belly, trying to calm my racing heart. Across the room, Marcus waited patiently, giving me the space I needed to breathe. "You were incredibly strong," he finally said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I managed a weak, hollow laugh. Strong wasn't how I felt. A small, considerate smile appeared on his face as he chose his next words with care. "Eleanor," he began, his tone becoming serious. "I didn't plan on bringing this up today, but after witnessing that, I can't stand by while he tries to dismantle your future." I looked up, my guard, immediately rising. "What do you mean?" Marcus opened his leather satchel and took out a simple, unmarked folder. The only thing on it was a small, embossed logo of an oak tree inside a circle. The Redwood Initiative. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. "I thought you were a university professor," I said, my voice quiet. "I am," he confirmed. "But that's not my only role." My head was spinning. "You're involved with this initiative?" Marcus shook his head gently. "I'm the chairman of the board. My grandmother endowed it decades ago." I just stared, trying to reconcile this new information. The unassuming ethics professor I knew was Marcus Thorne, the discreet head of one of the Bay Area's most powerful tech accountability groups, using a family fortune to challenge corporate overreach. "Why didn't you ever mention this?" I asked. "Because I needed you to trust the academic, not the activist." I took a shaky breath as all the pieces of my life clicked into a terrifying new picture. "So, why are you telling me now?" Marcus's gaze was steady and unwavering. "Because I'm offering you the full support of the initiative, the kind of support that will protect you from Julian and ensure your unborn child has the future they deserve." "What kind of support?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. He slid the folder across the glass table. "Our entire legal team. Our chief counsel will assign you the most formidable family law attorney in San Francisco, and our board has already approved a budget to cover every single expense." I was speechless. "Marcus, I couldn't possibly accept that." "This is not a handout, Eleanor," he said, his tone firm. "I have watched you build your company from the ground up. You champion ethical AI in an industry that desperately needs it. The initiative exists to defend people like you from bullies like him." My throat felt tight with emotion. "And," he continued, his voice lowering slightly, "this provides you with the resources to file a countersuit the moment Julian tries to use his venture capital to crush you." That was the brilliance of it. He wasn't just offering me a shield, he was giving me a sword. "Consider it," he said gently. "There's no rush." But as he left my office later that day, I knew he had given me the first real sense of hope I'd had in months. Things were about to change. All night, Marcus's offer was a beacon in a fog of fear, a lifeline I was almost too disoriented to grasp. But the fog was about to get much thicker. The next morning, I was in a virtual board meeting when my phone buzzed with an alert from a major tech blog. My own name was in the headline. "Eleanor, what the hell is this?" my co-founder asked, his voice sharp with alarm. A wave of nausea hit me as he shared his screen. An anonymous source close to the Vance family had leaked a story that painted me as a volatile and emotionally fragile founder who had ensnared one of Silicon Valley's top investors. The words swam before my eyes. It fabricated a history of impulsive business pivots and questioned my stability to lead a company while pregnant. It was accompanied by a candid, tear-streaked photo of me that my supposed friend Sarah had taken during a moment of vulnerability at a cafe just last week. The breath caught in my throat. This, this is all lies. Of course it is, my partner said. His tone solid, but his expression worried. But a piece like this, it's a hit job, Eleanor. This is the opening salvo in a very public battle. And that final insinuation about my stability was designed to wound me far more deeply than any attack on my career. You just need some space to focus on your health, he had said, his voice stripped of all its usual affection. I could only stand there, a silent scream trapped in my chest. Just for a while, until we closed the first round of the new fund. Each word landed like a punch. Our home, the place I thought was our sanctuary for our growing family, was now a place I was being exiled from because of his affair. When I stepped out onto the windy San Francisco street, a thick fog rolled in from the bay, chilling me to the bone through my jacket. My hands were numb. I couldn't stop shaking. The concierge in our building, a kind man named David, who always asked about my startup, gave me a look that was more than just sympathy. It was pure, unadulterated pity. The fragile calm I had struggled to maintain shattered under his gaze. I was barely inside the waiting Uber Black before the first sob broke free. My breath hitched as I gripped the cool leather of the seat. I wasn't weeping for my marriage. I was weeping because Julian and his PR guru girlfriend had just bulldozed my life to clear a path for their own. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. The text was short and sharp. A narrative is so easy to rewrite. I'd hate for yours to get erased. 1. An icy dread filled my stomach. Isabel. She wasn't content with just taking my husband. She wanted to destroy everything I had built. As I stared at the screen, another message came through. It was from Julian, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. The breathtaking hypocrisy of it made me feel sick. For the first time, I felt completely exposed, uncertain if I had the strength to withstand another attack. A horrible certainty settled in. This was a fight for my own survival, and Isabel had just fired the first shot. I sat frozen in the back of the car, her message glowing on my phone like a toxic warning. My hands were shaking too badly to text back, the iconic San Francisco cityscape blurring into a meaningless smear of lights. I had no idea how much more I could endure. My professional reputation was being shredded, I was being threatened, and my unborn child was now a pawn in a brutal game. The phone vibrated again. Julian, are you back at the apartment? I'm on my way. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat was tight with tears I refused to shed. About 10 minutes later, a soft tap on the car window made me jump. Julian stood there, his expression a perfect mask of husbandly concern. Eleanor, unlock the door. I lowered the window just an inch. How did you find me? You weren't picking up. I called your co-founder. He said you left abruptly. His voice was smooth as ever, but his eyes held a disturbing new combination of impatience and a raw possessiveness that was far more chilling than the Bay Area wind. He knelt down to peer inside. Olivia, open up. My trembling fingers finally obeyed. He slid in beside me, the German engineering of the car door thudding shut with a heavy finality. He let the quiet stretch, allowing me a moment to pull myself together before I could speak. The board is calling an emergency meeting, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That anonymous tip. Her tip. His jaw set, like stone. Show me the email. I passed him my phone. Isabel's carefully worded email was still displayed. His expression was unreadable. She sent this to you. It's more than that, I managed to say. She's trying to poison my reputation with the gallery's investors. They're getting spooked. Marcus leaned his head against the rich leather, breathing out a long, slow sigh. This isn't a simple act of jealousy. It's calculated. She's trying to isolate you, Make you feel so powerless, you'll just give up. Give up what? I whispered. On being a problem, he said, his voice eerily calm. A foul, metallic taste filled my mouth. I am not trying to be a problem. That doesn't matter to her, he replied. The fact that you exist is an inconvenience she intends to handle. The tears I thought I had exhausted began to trace new paths down my face. How can I possibly shield our son from that kind of poison? Marcus turned to me, his voice low and edged with something I could only describe as iron. You shield him by refusing to be broken, and you are not doing this alone. I shook my head, the simple movement feeling like a monumental effort. Marcus, I can't let you solve a disaster you created. This is past the point of assigning blame, he interrupted, his tone changing completely. This is about knowing what it's like to be in the crosshairs of someone who believes their influence makes them invincible. I just stared at him, lost. What are you talking about? He held my gaze for a long, charged second, and then he showed me a part of himself I never knew existed, because the first major corporate takeover I ever orchestrated was nearly sabotaged by a rival firm with deeper political ties and less of a conscience than Isabel could dream of. I didn't just counter their legal attacks. His voice grew hard, shedding its usual courtroom polish. I systematically unearthed a personal scandal that dismantled their lead partner's reputation so thoroughly. His own firm forced him out. A different kind of chill ran down my spine, one that had nothing to do with fear. It was understanding. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a brilliant attorney, he was a predator. 2 nights later, I scraped together the last of my emotional reserves to attend the Boston Museum of Fine Arts annual charity gala. I wouldn't let our son marinate in the terror that had taken root in me, the deep cellular exhaustion, the feeling that our world was tilting off its axis. I arranged my face into a mask of serenity, rested a hand on my growing belly, and stepped into the grand ballroom of the Copley Plaza, into an alternate reality of glittering chandeliers and meaningless chatter. Marcus should be here with me, a small voice inside me cried out. My chest ached. I know, my love, I whispered to my unborn child. He responded with a soft flutter, a little tap that felt like our own secret language. It's all right. I just wish he wanted to build a family as much as he wants to conquer a courtroom. I swallowed, fighting the lump that was forming in my throat. Me too, little one. The evening was a surreal performance of air kisses, the chime of crystal flutes, and the cloying perfume of 1,000 white hydrangeas. For one fleeting, beautiful moment, I thought I might actually survive the night without incident. But tranquility has become a luxury I can no longer afford. And that fantasy evaporated the second the charity auction started. In walked Marcus Thorne, the titan of Boston's legal scene. And he was not alone. Isabel Rossi, the firm's newest rising star, was on his arm, her body sculpted into a severe black gown, her victorious smile a silent declaration of war meant for me and the entire room. A quiet descended upon the opulent ballroom. Donors began muttering into their phones. Society columnists discreetly angled their devices. When Arthur's gaze finally locked with mine across the forest of auction paddles and towering floral arrangements, his face showed no remorse, only cold, hard strategy. He began to move toward me, a shark closing in on its target. My best friend squeezed my wrist in a silent show of support. It's okay, baby, I murmured to my stomach. Mommy is all right. Arthur was upon us, his voice a flawless performance of manufactured concern. There you are. I was starting to worry. His words were a play for the benefit of the prying eyes around us. I angled my head so his kiss found only air. I did not mirror his smile. Why here, Arthur? I asked, my voice holding a firmness that surprised even me. He feigned confusion, What are you talking about? This is the museum's biggest fundraiser of the year. I mean the painting, I clarified, my voice dropping. The Moreau. Why did you buy it for her tonight? Sienna, sensing imminent disaster, stepped closer. Arthur, darling, the Guggenheim curator is trying to get your attention. I kept my eyes fixed on my husband. The painting for our son's nursery. The one we picked out together. It will look beautiful in her apartment. Arthur's face tightened into a rigid mask, the charming public persona cracking and falling away as the truth of my words settled in. Get over it. The entire, vast ballroom seemed to tilt on its axis. I couldn't breathe. Before I could even react, the auctioneer, desperate to salvage the imploding atmosphere, cleared his throat loudly into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, our next item is a truly exquisite piece. Arthur leaned close, his whisper a sliver of ice against my ear. You brought this on yourself. He adjusted his tie, threw a look of pure venom at Sienna, and tried to reconstruct his public face. But I was stuck, paralyzed by the chilling realization that this wasn't just the reveal of his infidelity. This was my execution by spreadsheet. A quiet fell over the financial district of San Francisco as the first stunned murmurs grew into a tidal wave of notifications. 1,000 phone screens lit up, their cold light shifting from the enormous stock ticker behind the podium to my 8 months pregnant silhouette, and then back again. My husband Julian, the wunderkind founder of Apex Capital, was being publicly vivisected, and I was the collateral damage. I pasted on a smile, a brittle, agonizing thing, as my entire world came apart in high definition. I could feel the room's judgment shifting, the silent verdicts being passed down. The air grew thick with the intoxicating smell of scandal. As the influencer on stage, Katerina, posed for the cameras, she tapped the face of her smartwatch. The custom screen, a photo sharpened into perfect focus for everyone to see, a candid picture of her and Julian. Our new Apex investment app is about authentic partnership, the host stammered, completely losing his place, his gaze locked on the incriminating image on the massive screen. It demonstrates how a singular vision can bring assets closer, more intimately than ever before. A ripple of sharp intakes of breath swept through the room. The hedge fund managers and financial journalists were no longer looking at the product. They were staring at Julian. My heart hammered against my ribcage. Julian had turned a chalky white, his face a rigid mask of fury. He looked like he was about to be sick, but the app's slogan was suspended in the air above him, more damning than any accusation. Apex. See the true value. He couldn't hedge this. He couldn't short this. A wave of lightheadedness crashed over me, and I grabbed the back of a chair, my knuckles bleaching white. Julian glared at Katerina's wrist as if his stare alone could liquidate the asset. I don't want a man who builds investment portfolios. I want a man who can build a future with me. The thought was a silent scream inside my head. Julian finally hissed to his chief of staff, "Get her off that stage." But the damage to his reputation was done. The host mumbled a panicked apology, and the live stream was cut. But the photo from that watch was already a viral meme, burned into the collective consciousness of Wall Street. The silence that followed was deafening. Guests were looking everywhere except at us, their hushed whispers a barrage of insults aimed at the man whose name was on the invitation. For the very first time, I saw something in Julian truly fracture. Not his composure, but his ego. Katerina hurried to his side, her own face pale with dread, speaking in a low, frantic whisper, but Julian didn't seem to notice her. His gaze was fixed on me, pleading, furious, and completely exposed. He looked like a master trader watching his own can't-miss fund get wiped out by a black swan event he himself had created. And as I met that look, clinging to the chair to stay upright, I knew his pristine public image wasn't the only thing that had gone bankrupt tonight. With that one single image, he had leveraged our entire life together and lost it all. The launch party collapsed into a stunned, frigid silence. Investors and board members made for the doors, their faces a mixture of pity and contempt, all of them avoiding my gaze. Financial reporters were already live tweeting their scathing commentary from the lobby. And Julian just stood there, his hands balled into fists, his jaw clamped so tight I thought it might shatter. Katerina pulled at his arm. "Julian, we have to leave. Everyone is recording this." But he seemed frozen. I backed away toward the catering station, where a woman from our first round of funding offered me a bottle of water. I sank down onto a supply crate, my hands instinctively covering my stomach, a useless shield against the destruction. "I'm so sorry, my love," I begged silently. "I am so sorry." "Alara," a raw voice said from behind me. "We need to talk." I didn't need to turn. Julian was there, his presence consuming the small space. His face was a battlefield of warring emotions. Remorse, rage, fear, and a pathetic shred of hope were all twisted into a mask I no longer recognized. "I need to speak with my wife," Arthur said, his voice tight with controlled panic. I simply stood frozen. "Not right now." Isabel stepped forward, her smile a mask of pure condescension. "Oh, honestly, Chloe, drop the theatrics. Just listen to him." Her sentence was cut short by a voice that was calm, deep, and carried unquestionable authority. She said no. David, our project's primary developer and a legend in San Francisco real estate, had moved between us, a quiet and immovable presence. The few remaining architects and city donors who saw him knew exactly who he was. His name passed through the room in whispers, and their looks toward Arthur turned from confused to icy. David spoke to me softly. "Chloe, are you all right?" I could only nod, my words lost in a thick haze of disbelief. Arthur rounded on him, his anger flaring. "This is a private matter." David took one measured step closer, his voice low and as sharp as breaking glass. "Subjecting your pregnant wife to this kind of public humiliation is a serious health concern. That makes it my business. Someone needs to put her and the baby first. It's clear you're not capable of that." Arthur's face burned with a combination of fury and utter shame. "She's my wife." "Then it's high time you treated her like one," David answered, his tone leaving no room for argument. The massive gallery fell completely silent. Even the catering staff froze, their trays filled with half-empty champagne flutes. For a moment, Arthur looked as if he might actually swing at him. But then, the aggression just evaporated from his frame. His shoulders sagged, his jaw went slack, and his eyes darted around the hall, unable to meet the unwavering gaze of the man who had just shown him what real power was. Isabel folded her arms, her lips pursed in disgust. "Pull yourself together, Arthur. You look pathetic." But he was rooted to the spot. He just stood there, a hollowed-out shell of the architectural visionary he was supposed to be. And in that quiet moment, I understood. David wasn't trying to be some kind of hero. He was simply occupying the space where a decent man should have been standing all along. As the last of the guests escaped into the cool San Francisco fog, some gave me quick, pitying looks. Most just rushed away, eager to spread the story. Arthur was motionless in the middle of the hall, as if the ghost of that tiny sculpture in the penthouse model had him pinned to the floor. Isabel had finally given up on him, the sharp report of her heels on the marble echoing her fury as she left alone. I stayed in the back, trying to take slow, deliberate breaths, pleading with my pounding heart to be still. This much stress was not good for the baby. David kept his distance, his stance casual but alert, a silent guardian between me and the smoldering ruins of my life. Finally, Arthur stirred, not toward the exit, but toward me. He stopped a few feet away and collapsed to his knees. The handful of remaining staff stopped what they were doing, recognizing the gravity of the moment. "Chloe," Arthur choked out, his voice shattered. I I saw your expression when you saw the model." I looked at him, feeling only a vast, crushing weariness. "The entire city saw it." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "I put it there." The confession hung in the silence. Arthur swallowed, his voice trembling, with a vulnerability I hadn't heard since we were two broke students, sketching designs on napkins with nothing but ambition. "I made a catastrophic error. I hurt you. I never, ever intended to hurt you like this." His face was a mask of pure agony. "Then why, Arthur? Why her?" The question was a faint whisper, but it struck him like a physical force. His whole body seemed to collapse inward. "Because I was arrogant, and I was reckless, and I was a complete and utter fool." My breath caught in my throat. In 15 years, the great Arthur Thorne had never, not once, called himself a fool. Mortified by the audience, the gallery director tried to wave his crew away, but Arthur didn't even notice. He stood in the doorway of my small seaside cottage, the caramel air heavy with unspoken words. "I know nothing I can say will fix this," Marcus whispered, his voice ragged. "But I have to try to build a path back to you, if you'll let me." Our son Leo stared at him with the curious, solemn eyes of a 2-year-old sensing a deep adult sorrow. "Why did you make Mommy sad?" he asked, his voice tiny. "I did," Marcus rasped, his celebrated composure finally shattering. "More than you will ever know." A thick, aching silence filled the room. Then, Leo said something that felt like a fissure cracking the ground between us. "It's okay. Mommy and me are happy here." Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, the pain on his face absolute. From the kitchen table, a notification lit up the phone he'd left behind. A headline from a major architectural journal glowed on the screen. Exclusive, Thorne's Triumph, the man who reshaped a skyline. He seemed to shrink in the doorway, the layers of his fame and confidence stripped away, leaving him looking smaller and completely adrift. He gave me one last look, his eyes pleading for an absolution I could not give. But the chapter was closed. Moving on was for my own peace, not for his redemption. As he turned and walked to his car, utterly alone, a strange wave of serenity washed over me. The immense hold he once had on my world was gone, fractured by his own arrogance and the truth I'd discovered in that cruel, tiny sculpture. And for the first time in years, I could actually see the horizon. After the last of the moving boxes had been taken away, I stepped onto the little back deck and into the crisp ocean air. I felt drained and raw, but also incredibly clear, as if a long fever had finally broken. I leaned my forehead against a cool redwood post, breathing in the scent of salt and cypress, and brought my hand to my lips, kissing the faint indentation where my ring used to be. "He's going to have your strength," a steady voice said from beside me. I turned my head. David was standing by the railing, the distant Pacific glowing behind him, his calm presence the only anchor in my turbulent world. I rested my head against the cool glass of the patio door. "He shouldn't have to," I whispered, my hand on my belly. "No," he said gently, "but he will, because you're his mother." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, a true warmth spread through my chest. I didn't feel like a fool. I didn't feel broken. I didn't feel like a victim in the slightest. I just felt quiet. Maybe confronting Arthur wasn't a victory. Maybe it wasn't the dramatic final act. But the truth, finally brought into the open, had unburdened me of a terrible weight. a secret I had been forced to carry all on my own. What am I supposed to do now? I asked the twilight. David came to stand next to me. Now, you stop trying to restore the old painting, and you start with a fresh canvas. A brittle, tired laugh escaped me. That sounds about 1,000 times harder. Then you let the people who respect you help stretch it, he replied, his voice kind. Let me get you a car service. I looked up into his eyes and saw only sincere care and profound respect. There was not a single trace of pity. He wasn't a knight swooping in to rescue me. He was just a deeply good man who hadn't flinched when my entire world came apart. The charity auction, I said, remembering where we'd first truly talked. A faint smile touched David's lips. I'm very glad I decided to go that night. Just give me the word, and you're the head curator. I agree. The words came not from a place of desperation or need, but from a clear decision to build a life where my child and I would be safe, valued, and genuinely happy. David let out a long, quiet breath, one it seemed he'd been holding for a while. That's wonderful. There is, however, one final piece of business. A nervous energy fluttered in my stomach. He reached into his briefcase and slid, not an employment contract, but a large, elegant portfolio across the cafe table. It felt heavy in my hands, full of possibility. These are the preliminary submissions for the main gallery space at the new Community Arts Center, he explained, his eyes shining with passion. It's a completely blank slate. The entire artistic vision will be yours. You have more than earned the chance to create something beautiful from the ground up. Tears started to well in my eyes. David. He reached across the table and, with his thumb, gently brushed a tear from my cheek. The gesture was simple, incredibly gentle, and said everything. You don't have to curate your whole new life in one day, he said softly, but when you're ready, I would be honored to help you hang the first painting. A deep sense of peace flowed through me. Not dread, not anxiety, but a powerful and grounding calm. This was a real beginning. All I could do was nod. And for the first time in forever, the future didn't feel like a terrifying, empty gallery. It felt like a studio, filled with sunlight, waiting for color. As David walked me to the corner, the morning sun warming my face, I knew this wasn't just a new exhibit. This was the life I was finally curating for myself. And that is the place where this story finds its quiet harbor. The final chapter is written. If you have journeyed with us, following this path from its painful beginnings to its promising new sunrise, it is likely because some part of this story resonated with you. Perhaps you saw a reflection of your own spirit in Chloe's graceful courage. Maybe you recognized the integrity of David's unwavering, respectful support. Or perhaps you were simply reminded that rebuilding is not about victory, but about choosing to value your own canvas one day at a time. There is an ancient wisdom that teaches a powerful lesson. We are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. This is the very truth we've just witnessed. The characters in our story were not broken by their heartbreak. They refused to let the deception they endured dictate the rest of their lives. Instead, they consciously chose to rebuild on a foundation of self-worth. As one Roman philosopher famously noted, the mind has a unique power to take any obstacle and turn it into fuel for its own journey. If you take anything away from this narrative, let it be this simple, profound idea. You deserve a life of tranquility. You have the undeniable right to be honored and respected. You are entitled to a life built on truth, not deception. If this narrative offered you a moment of clarity or a small dose of strength, consider helping this message reach others. You can do that by liking the video, sharing it with someone who might be navigating a similar storm, and subscribing to become a part of our ongoing dialogue. Your story matters, and the most incredible parts of it have yet to be written. We want to share a quick reminder that the narrative you've just experienced is a work of creative fiction. It was crafted solely to navigate the intricate world of human feeling and to inspire personal reflection. Any similarity to real individuals or their circumstances is entirely unintentional. Our purpose is always to delve into universal themes like resilience and the hard decisions that shape us, never to depict the personal life of any particular person. Our mission in crafting these narratives is to offer a little bit of solace, a flicker of optimism, and a peaceful space for you to consider your own path with kindness. We are so grateful that you shared your time with us today and for the incredible energy you bring to this community.